I read 100 plus books this year, and in this video, I'm going to be going over the best books. I narrowed it down to the top 10, which was incredibly hard. I really wanted to keep this video really focused on just the best of the best. I have a mixture of nonfiction and fiction books here because I do read a variety. This is my breakdown of nonfiction versus fiction books I read this year. You'll see in this list of the best books, I had to have really learned something or really pulled on my emotions. I've had to have evoked some sort of deep feeling. So while I definitely read as a decompression, that's my primary focus of it, it's really reading's taken over my screen time. I used to binge Netflix while scrolling on my phone, and that's pretty much disappeared once I became re-obsessed with reading. Overall, I'd say it wasn't as hard getting to 100 as I anticipated. Most nights, I would say it's reading for a couple hours before bed, and then reading while I'm cleaning or working out or on walks, road trips, that sort of thing. And so I do mix in audiobooks as well. All right, without further ado, let's dive right into number 10. I did actually try to rank these, but I will say my top 4 books are all 6 stars. They go beyond the 5 out of 5 star rating to me. So you really can't go wrong. And I really couldn't properly rank those. But let's dive in. Number 10. The Midnight Library. It really intrigued me, the premise of it. So the premise of it is you're following the point of view of a woman who goes into this library and she has different books, and each book are based on minute decisions that she could have made in her life and how that would have turned out differently for her. And so she can essentially open the books and dive right into that life by reading the first couple of sentences or something, and she can experience what it would have been like if she had pursued some things. And she came to this library really in a bad place. She felt like her life was pointless, had all these regrets and stuff. And so I don't want to give too much of it away. There's definitely some trigger warnings, but she gets to try out all these different lives in this Midnight Library. And it was a very interesting journey, being able to experience these different lives with her. Super interesting. I definitely predicted the ending, but it was done in a way that I would have been unhappy, I think, if it hadn't been that ending, if that makes sense. So overall, I really enjoyed this book. I cried. It's just, I think as someone who I always have so many interests, and I'm always just such a scattered mess a lot of the time, I really resonated with this, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. All right, number 9 is a nonfiction book, and it's called Being Mortal: Medicine and What Matters in the End. So this book is written by a doctor, and it really kind of focuses on our medical system and how we should maybe reevaluate our medical system here in the US, where we kind of have this view that we should treat at all costs to save the life, even if the quality of life for the person might be diminished. And so it kind of examines what is actually worth living for, and maybe in these chronic situations where someone's going to die, there's no way to escape it, focusing on quality of life as opposed to prolonging it at all cost would be the better medical decision. And it just explores it in such a great way. And I know it's going to change the way I view end of life care for anyone in my life. I just think it's a really important book for everyone really to read and to discuss with their loved ones. All right, next is totally opposite spectrum. This is actually my only romance in this list, which I read a good chunk of romances this year, so I think I just don't tend to rate them as high. And so the book I read is called Summer Romance. I never would have thought, based on the title alone, that this book would have made my top 10 of the year. But this book ended up being so deep that I just had such a great time reading it. I was crying, and you feel like you're going on this journey with this person. And I think this book is probably one of those examples of a book that's hitting you at the right time. So for me, I've been kind of going through a big change this past year, and this just really hit. And so I loved it. One of my takeaways that I think about all the time after reading this book is there's some quote in there, and I'm going to probably butcher it, but it talks about how getting a dog, for example, is such a risk, but yet you should do it if it gives you joy, knowing that yes, it might end, but having the joy and living life fully in the moment is worth that risk. And yeah, I don't know. I think I needed to hear this book at that time. So yeah, that was my favorite romance of the year, and I just really enjoyed it. Number 7, The In-Between, Unforgettable Encounters During Life's Final Moments. So this book was really intriguing. I would not have expected when I first picked this up that this would have made my top 10 of the year either, but it follows a hospice nurse, and she talks about her experiences working with people in their final moments of life and kind of just patterns she observed in her career. And she tells different stories throughout it, and it was just so interesting hearing some of the commonalities that happen during life's final moments. And I feel like kind of in reading this and then the previous one on my list, that Being Mortal, and kind of my grandma was in hospice, and I think it really helped me kind of come to terms with that, because I think I come from, I guess before I read these books, I kind of came from the Western view that like you should fight at all costs to save a life, but that's not necessarily what matters in the end. I think this book actually works for anyone with any religious background, and I think anyone could find aspects of it really interesting. So highly recommend that book. 1 second, I need a break here. How adorable is this mug? We picked this up when we were doing Christmas markets in Europe. My husband and I, we just got back from that, and I could not get this mug while I was there at one of the Christmas markets in Vienna. So I'm rocking it even though it's after Christmas. Just better in a boot, guys. Okay. Back to my list. Number 6 is Beartown. This is by the same author of A Man Called Uwe, and that was one of my favorite books I read last year. Fredrik Backman is just an amazing author. Everything I've read of his has been, I believe, 5 stars. So, and I still have to go through the rest of his list, but Beartown is just so good. The premise of it is not going to do it justice, because I kept hearing people talk about this book online, and I kept putting it off because I was like, it doesn't sound intriguing to me, but it definitely is, and I don't want to give too much away. There's definitely going to be some trigger warnings on this, so if you're concerned about those, look that up. But this story, I guess in the simplest terms, this story is about a tragedy that happens in a small town. Kind of the life and blood of the small town is ice hockey, and you follow different POVs, and it's just like brilliantly written, and that like you will change one like paragraph and it will go to somebody else's point of view, and you get it. It somehow flows. Like Fredrik Backman is just such a talented author in his ability to weave in different people's point of views, and is just so gripping. It felt so real. I think it's just, he's an amazing author. There's 2 more books in this series that I am planning to read this winter because it was just so good. I just got to make sure I'm in a good emotional state for it, because this one's definitely a tearjerker. All right, number 5, we're going back to a nonfiction. This is called Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to by David Sinclair. So the author is a Harvard researcher who studies longevity, and in this book he compiles kind of all the latest findings in the longevity field and kind of how you can apply that to your life. And it's done in such a, like, I definitely recommend the audio version for this book because he's such an optimistic guy. It'll make you feel like, oh my goodness, you can live actually long, and like the science is getting there, and there are things you can do to help prolong your life. And even like if you feel like it's too old to pursue something, like, well, maybe not, because in the future he's very convinced that people will be able to live to like 120 years old fairly regularly. And so he dives into like the science of like cellular aging and how to kind of slow down that process, and it was really good. Another tea break. I woke up with a sore throat today, so I apologize if my voice is a little scraggly there, more than usual. All right, now we're in my top 4, guys. And like I said, these are all 6 out of 5 stars plus. Like, these books exceeded any rating system. I love them so much. So these are my top 4, guys. First up is an author, and this is her first novel, which still blows my mind, called Remarkably Bright Creatures. You're following the point of view of an octopus and an elderly woman, and who works in the aquarium. And it takes place in Washington, which is where I'm from, which I'm sure added to the atmosphere of it. But it was just so cute and so deep and just, it's just so beautiful. And you end up falling in love with this octopus. Like, if she's just was such a talented author. His POV was actually my favorite throughout the book. It was a beautifully written book. It's one of those ones when you finish reading it, you're just like staring off into space because you're like, how can I move on after reading this brilliant book? I felt similarly with the next book too, guys. And like I said, these top 4, the order could be moved around very much. Sorry, I keep moving. I talk with my hands, so this just keeps happening. I apologize if the audio keeps coming in and out. Okay, so number 3, Project Hail Mary. I have turned so many people in my life onto this book, and they've all loved it. So I'm really glad that it's been successful. And hopefully, if you guys haven't checked it out, you'll read this, because I'm not a big sci-fi reader. Like, literally out of my 100+ books I read this year, 2 of them have been sci-fi. And one of them was this. And this is so good. So this author does tons of research for his books. So it feels kind of almost like it could be realistic, if that makes sense. And you feel like you learn about space, and it was just super intriguing. So kind of the premise of this is there is a man, you're following the POV of a man who wakes up in a spacecraft with amnesia. He has no remembrance of what he's doing, where he's going in the spacecraft, and all he knows, he is on a mission to save Earth. And then you follow as his memories start coming back and his journey, and it is just so good. I don't want to give too much away. It was the perfect book. There's no notes that I would change about it. It was wonderful. I just noticed these top 4 that I all said are 6 stars are all different genres. I think that just goes to show the variety of books I tend to read. I get bored with one set genre. They're just all kind of all over the place. But anyways, number 2 is called The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood Caused an Epidemic of Mental Illness. Oh my goodness, guys. I have read so many nonfiction in my life, and this author did it perfectly. For me, it's really important when reading a book that is really dense with information that they provide chapter summaries and an overview of what you just learned in that chapter. And this author does it every single time. But not only that, the substance of it is so relevant and important. He compiles the latest research on the mental health crisis in our society and kind of shows how the starting of social media increased our mental health issues so much so, and smartphones. And I think if you have kids, this is especially important. But even me and Alex, who don't have kids, we got so much good information from this. It really has changed the way we think about consuming social media and being more mindful of the stuff we put out there and how the impact it can have. This is going to be a book I think about all the time. I'm probably going to want to revisit it again. Really well written, such well researched, and yeah, just perfect. And speaking of perfect, my number 1 book, I have no notes either. It is perfection. And I'm going to try not to cry because even almost a year later, I could see it happening. So my number 1 is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I read a number of her books this year, and this one was by far my favorite. It is such an interesting, emotional story. You're following the POV of 2 women during German-occupied France. They're very different. They're sisters, and you're kind of seeing their process as they're going through the war, as they're kind of doing their own heroic things. And it's amazing. Oh, I'm going to start crying just thinking about it. It was so well written. It feels so real. Kristen Hanna is just so talented at really infusing. She does tons of research for her books. Even though it's historical fiction, she tries to incorporate a lot of kind of real life situations and how it was back then. And it was just so good. So good. Definitely a tearjerker, though. I mean, it's about World War II. It's going to be a tearjerker. All right, guys, that's it. That's my list. Those are my top 10 books out of reading 100+ books this year. But I do have so many other books, even other ones that were 5 stars to me, that didn't make this list. So I'm going to be putting out a few other videos kind of diving into some other books that I just think that you guys should read as well. Overall, such a great reading year for me. For those of you that don't know, I kind of rediscovered my love for reading when I biked from London to Istanbul. which you would think because we had literally no time at night to like settle down and read that I wouldn't have discovered this. But I listened to so many audiobooks just to get through, because when you're biking 8 hours a day, it gets kind of monotonous. And so I needed things to break up the day. And so I started listening to audiobooks, and I just fell in love with reading. I used to have this mentality that everything you read had to be really deep and emotional. And I hope this video didn't make you think that like, if you want to read lighthearted books, you shouldn't, because I read so many lighthearted books, because for me, it's really a decompression. And I think one of the reasons I didn't read a ton before was because I used to hold myself to these ridiculous, like, every book I read needed to be really deep and I needed to gather something from it. And I used to have this rule where if I read one fiction book, I needed to read another nonfiction where I learn a lot right afterwards. And I think having those beliefs really prevented me from reading a ton. And so instead I would do things with my downtime that was not as good, like binging Netflix shows and scrolling on social media. So I think overall reading has been such a positive thing in my life. I don't think I'm going to go for 100 books next year, though. I kind of like not having a goal. And I was definitely feeling a little bit time pressed at the end, especially because we were traveling for the last few weeks of the year. And I don't like feeling time pressed when it comes to something that I view as decompression. So I don't think I'm going to set a goal next year, but I'm so glad that I've picked up this habit of reading instead of binging Netflix shows. It's just really, I think, enhanced my life, improved my concentration, and everything. So I'm always looking for book recommendations. I'd love to hear what your guys' maybe top 5 books were of the year in the comments. Let me know. And if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. And I will be posting some more videos for year-end wrap-ups coming soon. I'll see you on the next video.